Just a few things to say before we get started. Dorset Humanists was founded in 1996, so this year is our 25th anniversary. Humanist UK is actually celebrating its 125th anniversary, so we're literally 100 years behind the main organisation. We're planning a celebration in November, and we will of course let you have the details of that in due course. We're hoping it's going to be have a band and a bit of a knees up. Well, I'm very pleased that we've also been able to schedule our next walk with real people on Sunday the 23rd of May. So do please join us for that walk if you would like to, weather permitting, of course. Yeah, we're recording the event today, so if you don't want to be seen on the recording, especially if you are still eating your lunch and don't want to see people to see what you're eating or anything like that, then you may wish to turn off your video for the duration. Our speaker today is Zara Qureshi. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Zara. Zara graduated in politics and modern foreign languages. She spent the last 6 years of her life trying to master the art of asking questions about the world around her and thinking critically, which all sounds very good. She's contributed her thoughts on London Live, BBC Radio Asian Network, and in Parliament. She's project manager for the Equiano Project, and she's going to tell us about what that is all about. So Zara, over to you. I will make you host again so that you've got full control over anything you need to do.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen again so you can see the presentation that I've put together. Just going to get that out of the view. So today's topic is identity politics and why that has failed us and why it's time for better ideas. But first of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to your organisation, the Dorset Humanists, and to David for the very warm welcome. And I can see with the number of people here today, there is a genuine interest in an alternative viewpoint. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to voice this viewpoint. A bit about myself, I've just graduated from the University of Manchester and I'm quite new to the world of giving talks. So any kind of feedback to my presentation, whether that be positive or constructive, is welcome. And I encourage you to give me your feedback with respect to that. And while I'm here, I'd like to establish a few personal goals. I think that I see this as a learning opportunity. My first goal is to establish a common understanding. I think that there will be differences in opinion, of course, but I think it's important to emphasize where we have common ground. The second thing that I wish to achieve is to find meaningful solutions to the problems that we've identified and attempt to assess the effectiveness of these solutions. And finally, I really want to have an open discussion, and this informs my talk philosophy. So like I said, I see this as a learning opportunity for both you and I. I've got pen and paper at the ready, so I'm ready to take notes, and I'm really interested with what you have to say as well. And I want this to be a more structured way to have a conversation. So I've just graduated from university, so I know exactly how it feels to come out of a 50-minute lecture and just forget about everything that was spoken about. And it's really not conducive for people like me who have really short attention spans. So I really wish that this is more of a conversation. And so I've created a talk roadmap. We're at the introduction. And then the next thing that I will talk about is who I am and what the Equiano Project is. And then these red arrows here symbolize 10 to 15 minutes worth of Q&A, feedback, commentary, whatever you wish it to be. So I've not taken away any more time from your usual Q&A sessions. Then we will talk about what identity politics is and why that has failed us. So we will be answering the question, Q&A, and then what our solutions are. And then finally, we'll follow that up with a conclusion and a final round of Q&A, feedback, or commentary. Before I proceed, I'd like to mention our growing social media. We've obviously got a website, And that's quite a popular choice when it comes to discovering organizations. But we've also got a Twitter, YouTube, like yourselves, Facebook and Instagram. I highly recommend that you join us on our social media networks and check out our videos on YouTube. We've got quite a few prominent speakers like Trevor Phillips, Aisha Kambi, who give really meaningful insights into their understanding of identity and the current issues that we've got pertaining to that. So without further ado, who am I? Well, actually, I was going to make this presentation and not talk about who I am. And I thought, well, halfway through, how silly would that be? I'm talking about identity politics and all of that stuff without being introspective and understanding how I see identity and how that informs my beliefs. There are several kind of conclusions that I've come up with when having these conversations with myself. But I think the most important conclusion that I've come up with is that I think that identity is complex. It's really intricate and it's really complex. And I came up with this conclusion by making myself do a self-exercise. I got a timer out and I made myself speak about someone I really care about for 10 minutes. And so what I realized for the first couple minutes, what I was doing is I was describing their identitarian traits, so their hair color, their ethnic group, their gender, how tall or short they were, their physical appearance, for example. And then for the rest of the 8 minutes, I was talking about their personality, their values, their peculiarities, how they laugh at my jokes or how they do my hair so lovely and, you know, how I'm so rubbish at hair myself. And then I got my family to do this exercise and I noticed the same pattern. For the first couple of minutes, they were describing who I am. And I guess that's important when you want to describe someone in a visual sense. But then for the rest of the time, they were talking about how endearingly annoying I am with, you know, I've got a habit where I shake my leg at the dinner table, and they kind of said, well, Zara, if you ever sat at the dinner table and you didn't shake your leg, that wouldn't be you. So we know how intricate identity is, because if there's one cog in the machine that doesn't really work, we question the person's identity. And another way to look at this is, we're all gonna die one day, and how do we want to be remembered? So personally, I would rather have 10 pages worth of an obituary that talks about my values and how I've implemented them in my life, rather than 10 pages worth of someone talking about what ethnicity I am, or what sexuality I have, or what gender I am. I think that's far more meaningful. And when Martin Luther King spoke about the content of our character, I think this is what he meant. I think he meant that there is a world beyond the exterior, beyond our skin color, beyond our identitarian traits, that is more meaningful. And so, yeah, I would like to be defined primarily by my own values. So here are my personal values. I like to question everything. I like to learn. Probably don't have time to go through all of them, but it's certainly something that I can come back on when we come to our Q&A. I had a religious upbringing, and you know, that made me really skeptical of the certain things that I was learning, and I kind of carried that skepticism, not in a cynical way, but in a critical way throughout my life. I really value the importance of freedom and the right to engage in new experiences. I've had a multicultural upbringing. I've come from, you know, I've got family from all over the world, and you know, I've lived in different countries. My immediate family, however, are Pakistani. The one that I really want to talk about, a value that is so dear to me, is common humanity. Seeing each other in terms of a common humanity. And the reason why I appreciate this so much is because it's made me think a lot. So when I was 16 years old, I got into sixth form and I started to listen to a lot of political rap music, and that informed a lot of the political beliefs that I had. And I was just, you know, I was young, still am young, but I was questioning the world around me and learning about different things. And I was very vocal in that. And when I got to sixth form, I was very vocal in my opinions. And I came across a friend of mine called Sam, who is a white bloke. And he was terribly nice. And the reason why it was terrible for me was because I'll explain it in a bit, but he was so nice. The sixth form that I went to was full of drama, horrible people, but I couldn't fault him in that character sense. And so he would come up to me and he would challenge my beliefs. And in my head, I would be thinking, well, what do you know? You're a white guy. because of the rap that I was listening to, the anchoring bias that I had to certain political leanings, certain political discourse. It was in my head, but I didn't vocalize it to him because I felt like, because of his niceness, because of his kindness, I had to critique his argument instead. I certainly couldn't make an ad hominem remark. And I was watching this interview by Funke Amimbola, who's a lawyer. She came on a show on YouTube called Trigonometry, and she had the exact same experience as me. And she realized how important a common humanity is. Let me just show you this video. It's a minute.
And the biggest wake-up call for me was I started doing work with law firms around diversity. And I remember speaking at an event almost 10 years ago. And the senior partner of the firm stood up, welcomed everyone. I was doing a speech. And in my mind, I was thinking, you are the problem. You know, you're a white guy in your 50s. You're the reason why no one, you know, if you're black, if you're, you know, lacking financial, you know, funds to get into the profession, it's your fault that people can't get in if they're disabled. You know, all these underrepresented groups were going through my mind. And that was the dialogue I immediately assumed. And I thought, don't act on it. You know, talk to the guy first. But I'd be lying if I said that wasn't what I was thinking. I spoke to him and we've become the best of friends since then. He's great friends with my son, who is the same colour as me and 18. This chap is now in his late 50s, still white, you know, so that's not changed. But I made so many assumptions about him. He wasn't from a socioeconomically privileged background at all. I think he still is the first in his family to go to university. He had slogged it out to reach that position. It wasn't easy for him, and actually was doing so much to improve the lot of others. But I immediately assumed that he was the enemy, and thank goodness I didn't act on that.
So it's about challenging your assumptions about people and stepping away from very limiting optics in which we see the world. So it's through my inquisitiveness that I started poking my nose around, asking questions that I'd found the Equiano Project. Now, the Equiano Project is an ideas and discussion forum that was founded last year in August. And what we do is we facilitate conversations about freedom, a common humanity, and universalism. We usually deal with the topics of identity politics and race relations. And I asked Inaya as to why this came to be. And she said, well, she saw that there was this polarized discourse happening in 2020 with the riots that were happening in America, protests as well in the UK, and a lot of civil unrest. And that was a real catalyst in bringing about the Equiano Project as an alternative solution to what we saw was a very politically polarized environment. And so our goal is to live in a society where race is obsolete, in the sense that hair color and eye color is obsolete. So when we think about people, we certainly don't make value judgments based on the color of their hair or their eye color, and that shouldn't be the case for your skin color or your gender or your sexuality or whatever your identitarian category may be. So it's about building a common humanity where those defining things don't matter anymore. So the Equiano Project is actually named after a writer called Olaudah Equiano. And he was born in a southern part of Nigeria in a Igbo region in 1745. And when he was 11 years old, he was kidnapped with his sister and then trafficked off as a slave to European colonizers. And within 3 years of being enslaved, which was actually quite a rapid amount of time, he managed to learn to read and write and become literate, and through that he was able to buy his freedom for £40. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it was actually the yearly salary of a teacher, so think about it as £40,000 today. And so once he bought his freedom, he wrote a very seminal text, so the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano, which informed the abolitionist movement. And so why we take inspiration from Olaudah Equiano is because his story is basically one that showcases the importance of agency and personal responsibility and making positives out of a negative situation. So imagine his scenario. It's the worst possible set of cards that one can be dealt with, but he managed to find agency within himself and then free himself and then help make society a better place. And that's the kind of ethos that we aspire to achieve. And so who is the Equiano Project? Who works for the Equiano Project? It's just Inaya Folarin Iman, who is the director and the founder of the project, and it's just me. So I'm the project manager. So Inaya takes care of the overall trajectory of the Equiano Project. She is the face of the Equiano Project, and I provide a supporting role in that. So what do we do in specific? So what we do is schools outreach. We go into schools and we don't teach them any kind of political stuff, but we teach them about the importance of critical thinking and how to form arguments. So for example, how to be aware of logical fallacies, the importance of debate, how to communicate with each other, think about listening to one another. And we also teach them how to build relationships based on what we share. So the idea that we may be different, we may look different, but ultimately we can all still be live in a happy society where we can be friends based on what we share. We also do media appearances and commentary. I'm sure that you are perhaps familiar with Inaya doing that, and we provide commentary on all sorts of issues. And we also do talks like this for the government, organizations like yourself and universities. So here are some examples of some of the work that Inaya has done. And so, yeah, so we're at our first Q&A. I'm just gonna scoot over to Zoom so I can see you. If I can, I just need to, I don't know how to.
Are you trying to stop screen sharing, Zara?
Well, actually, I'm opening the floor to questions if
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. You've.
So
right.
I can stop my screen share if that helps.
Then we'd probably be able to see more people on the screen, and that would be helpful, I think.
Yeah.
If so, okay. So if people have already got some questions beginning to form in your mind, we usually ask you to use the blue hand symbol. I'm assuming I'll still be able to see the blue hand symbol, even though Zara is currently the host. Or you can pop a question in the chat, or you can wave at me. I might be able to see you, but only if you turn your video back on for the Q&A. How long have we got for this Q&A, Zara? About 10 minutes or?
10 minutes, yeah.
About 10 minutes, okay. Well, while people are thinking, I was wondering, Zara, if you could just say a little bit more about what you think identity politics is, because, you know, it's one of those phrases that gets bandied around a lot, and maybe people don't have a very clear idea of what we really mean by that. How does it differ from ordinary politics?
So that was actually what I was going to cover in the next segment of my talk. So if that's something that everyone is keen to get answered right now, I'm happy to proceed. But if anyone has any questions with respect to who I am or what the Equiano Project is or any other general questions, I'm happy to answer right now.
Yeah, okay, we'll go on to the identity politics in your presentation. In your presentation, it'll be fine.
Perfect. I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay.
Put this aside. So, what is identity politics and why has it failed us? Now, as you can see, I've got two images of two very extreme forms of identity politics on both the left and the right. As you can see over here, we've got a group of white ethno-nationalists coming together, forming a bond over some very extreme ideologies like Nazism, as you can see, with the endorsement of the Nazi flag. And then on this side, you've got a picture of what seems to be a Black Lives Matter protest turned riot with the quite violent imagery in the background. You've got fire. And so this isn't to be seen as a direct comparison of one another, but more so as a mere example to show that identity politics is something that affects both sides of the political aisle and not just one. So in order to understand identity politics, we need to understand what's going on right now. So I think identity is becoming ever more political, particularly with respect to how we see ethnicity or race. We know this because when we talk about party politics, traditionally, these party politics were separated on the basis of, so you see polarization based on economic values. Now what you see is polarization based on identity. So what you'll have is US party politics being defined as, so for example, you have Democrats being known as the party of ethnic minorities, whereas you'll have the Republican Party being perceived as the party of white people. And this shouldn't really be the case, because people shouldn't be voting on the basis of their skin color. They should actually be voting on the basis of policies. But this is what's happening, and it's really interesting. Ashley Jardina has done some interesting work with respect to white identity politics, and what she's found in America is that as time progresses, more and more white people are identifying with their white ethnic grouping in a way that is politically meaningful. So it might tell you something about the way that they will vote. This is to be, what's important to note is that this isn't necessarily a case of racial antipathy. So what they're not saying is that because we identify as white, which is more salient in politics, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're saying that white people are better than other groups of people. There will be a few outliers, of course, but that's not the ultimate argument. Rather, what she finds is that such groups are coming together, and what you have is a case of in-group, out-group, and they want to come together to protect an interest, a common interest. So what it seems to me is that identity, as much as it is who we are, is who we are not. So it can be reactionary. So for example, I could have a biologist stand 20 meters away from me and say that I'm a biologist and I love to study animals, and I could react and say, well, I'm not a biologist and I don't like to study animals. So identity, as much as who we is, as much as is, identity is who we are, but it's also who we are not. I think when we look at the BLM protests in the UK, in Manchester, for example, what you have is you have this reactionary element. So when you look at cases where the White Lives Matter flag was flown across the Etihad Stadium, that was reactionary. Identity was constructed in a reactionary way. One way to look at identity politics is actually look at the word itself. And I think that's really important because it's a very new term that has sprung up into existence. It's certainly, a word that wasn't thrown around 30, 40 years ago. I think you guys would be in a better position to make that judgment, because I've only been alive for 23 years. And so it's gained a lot of political traction right now, more so than it has previously. And there might be a specific reason as to why this has happened. So one could look at where it was first coined, or where it was first used, where it had meaning. The term is actually attributed to a lady called Barbara Smith, who wrote it in the Combahee River Collective statement. The Combahee River Collective was a Black lesbian feminist organization in Boston, America. And the overarching framework under which they operate is critical race theory and intersectionality. So one could make the argument that identity politics is somewhat illusory or synonymous with these two frameworks, or very specific way of seeing the world. Barbara Smith certainly makes the case for it in a Guardian article. She says, in 1977, I co-authored the Combahee River Collective Statement, a document that emphasized the overlapping forms of economic and social oppression faced by Black women. The Combahee Statement coined the term identity politics, and it was instrumental in pushing the international left and other political movements to understand inequality as a structural and intersectional phenomenon which affects oppressed groups differently. So I've highlighted very specific terminologies, international left. I should have highlighted structural, intersectional, and oppressed groups, because they all come under the umbrella terms of critical race theory and intersectionality. So yeah, one could definitely make the argument that this is what identity politics is. It's something very, very specific, especially where you look at where the term was first coined. But one could also make the argument, well, hasn't politics always been concerned with identity? But I think that this kind of question relies on a very loose conceptualization of what politics is. So the definition would be, politics can organize itself to protect the interests of a group, and those interests can arguably form an identity. And I can see that happening. So for example, you might have a national union of teachers, and it's their collective interests as teachers that forms their identity. So it's a really simple definition. It's one that everyone can work with. There are two weaknesses, and I think they should be acknowledged before we proceed. So the first weakness is it completely ignores where the term was first coined. And the second weakness is that it kind of conflates the idea that every kind of occurrence where you have someone identifying with their identity is political. So I might identify as a University of Manchester student, and that might make me more interested into stuff that's happening in Manchester or at that university, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I wish for it to be politicized or have any political recognition or meaning. And so with all of that aside, if you take the very loose and simple definition, you could make the case, yes, previous historical movements like the civil rights, second wave feminism were based around identity-based issues. So then what the question is now is that, okay, where you do have examples of identity politics, what is the goal that they are trying to achieve, and what framework do they operate under? And that is where we will find salient differences and potential problems. So using the definition that we've just established here, we can look at what's going on right now. And we find that when we take a bird's eye view on the problem, it's a problem on both the left and the right. So we've got this kind of culture war going on. You've got this left-right polarization, and it actually promotes and fuels this culture war. On the right, you have people saying that everything is woke, universities are woke, the media is woke, everything is woke. And then on the left, you have everyone, people dismissing everyone as Nazis and fascists. That's why you have certain, what you would think, moderate speakers being cancelled because they are deemed as Nazis or fascists at universities. And if you think about this as a culture war, theoretical culture war, if you look at the way weapons are deployed, they're deployed when you use like a bomb or a grenade. You deploy it so you never have to confront your enemy. So I think that when you use these terms in the way that they are used, you never actually have to confront the other person. You never actually engage with what they're saying. You never listen to them. And when we talk about culture war or war in general, we talk about victims and casualties. And I think in this war, in this culture war, reason becomes the real victim, and so does dialogue. And eventually that means our ability to understand one another. So when we look at identity politics, I think there is two groups that you can frame them under. One is identity politics that focuses on a common humanity, and the other is identity politics that focuses on a common enemy. So I think I want to use Martin Luther King and the civil rights as an example, because when he was alive, he came across these other types of identity politics. But I think there was something very special about his version of identity politics. So what he emphasized, and what was very powerful about Martin Luther King's beliefs, was that he emphasized that everybody could be united as one common human race. So he said that all men are one, all men are brothers, and he was very informed by his Christian faith. And so in Christianity, you have the notion of, human life is sacred, and that kind of informed his political beliefs. So he said things like, Black supremacy is as dangerous as white supremacy, and God is not interested merely in the freedom of Black men and brown men and yellow men. God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race. So it wasn't necessarily about one group over the other. It was about leveling every single human being to an equal moral status. Contrast this with some of the ideas that came before him. So, it was a similar situation where Black people were discriminated against in the most heinous ways. You have people like Paul Cuff and Martin Delaney in the early 19th century, and what they advocated for was Black separatist movements. So they really didn't believe that Black people and white people or other people of other ethnic groupings could live together in harmony. They saw what was going on and they thought, well, this is really, it's not possible. What we need to do is, as Black people, we need to gain our freedom and then eventually go back to Africa, where we came from, and develop there. And I think, it's understandable why these thoughts had come about, especially looking at the terrible situation. But I think that this way of thinking was not only wrong, we've proved that to be wrong, but also very pessimistic. Again, you have people like Elijah Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, that actually advocated for Black supremacy. So he saw this injustice, but what he said was, let's invert it. Black people are superior to white people. So he said, he's quite violent in his language as well. And he wasn't very sympathetic to Black people who actually wanted to live peacefully with white people. He just didn't think that it was possible. He said, he was talking to white people, he said, your entire race will be destroyed and removed from this earth by Almighty God. And those Black men who are still trying to integrate will inevitably be destroyed along with the whites. So very us and them kind of dynamic here. Malcolm X is also a really good example. He's known to have said, if ballots won't work, bullets will. And he was talking about white people. But what's really interesting about Malcolm X is the older he grew and the more life experiences he accumulated, he traveled to Egypt, he traveled to Mecca to do his pilgrimage, he realized that he was wrong himself. And he saw lots of different people come together, live in harmony from different nationalities and ethnicities. And he realized for a second that I might be wrong. And he started to develop this new philosophy, which I don't think he had enough time because he was killed before he managed to develop that. But he started to reject his common enemy kind of politics and started to adopt a more liberal approach, as Martin Luther King did. So here are some examples of common enemy identity politics. So this is a book that was recommended to me by my university, and I've read it a couple of times. It's called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. So it singles out white people as the problematic group. And I've read the book, it's quite dismal. It says that white people have privilege, white people are socialized, so they will never understand what we're trying to say. There's no point talking to them. That's basically a very short essence of what the book is trying to say. And so what it says is that there needs to be some sort of internal revolution among ethnic minorities for any sort of equality to happen. There's no point in talking. Examples like this, white people need to train out of their own biases. So in a liberal democracy, what you would have is the concept of innocence until proven guilty. What you have here is you assume and you assert that white people are biased to begin with, which you first of all have no kind of tangible or substantiating evidence for, and it's really divisive. It backfires a lot because people don't like being told that they are such a way. And I'm an ethnic minority, and I certainly don't want to be placing blame on my fellow citizens in Britain or whoever about what they don't believe or do believe. I certainly don't know that to be the case. Again, you have this on the right as well, the Ku Klux Klan. They still exist, again, emphasizing a common enemy, that would be Black people. This guy is called Richard Spencer. He himself is a white ethno-nationalist. He believes that white people should have their own country, their own state, and basically just live in that, and there shouldn't be any sort of liberal integrationism he didn't differ much from what Paul Cuff and Martin Delaney used to talk about, which is quite interesting. But again, very pessimistic, very common enemy kind of approach taken here. So it's worth talking about why Martin Luther King's politics or vision was the superior vision. And the first reason is, well, he kind of rejected the idea that people need to live in separate states based on their race. He thought, well, that's nonsense. We can all live in a given space together and in harmony. He may not have seen it in his lifetime, but he truly and genuinely believed it. And he was right. Flash forward to today, that's vastly the case that, you know, that we see today. People of all sorts of different backgrounds, religions, and so on and so forth live in harmony. Sure, there might be cases where things break down, but overall we're living in harmony. The other problem with emphasizing a common enemy is that you bring back race consciousness and essentialism. And so rather than looking at the concept of race and thinking about how weak it is, first of all, the way that we see race in a political sense has no kind of scientific validity. So there's no kind of calling that into question. You actually solidify the concept of race. And then what it becomes is, it becomes a competition of status. So you are concerned with status more than you are with things like equal opportunity. And I think it then problematizes and is pessimistic about racial harmony itself. So I read this article in the New York Times maybe a year and a half ago, and it was this writer talking about whether or not her Black children could be friends with fellow white children, which was, I thought, hugely regressive, something that probably Martin Luther King, he probably wouldn't have wanted that. The other reason why his vision was so important was that it emphasized the importance of universalism, that race is irrelevant, that skin color is irrelevant, that your identitarian groupings are irrelevant, but we all have this common ground, a common morality, and everyone is afforded that irrespective of their identitarian grouping. So it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, you have an inherent moral value. It doesn't matter what you look like, you have an inherent moral value. Everyone is human being first. The other thing that is quite different about liberal politics and radical politics is the time taken to achieve change. It's different. So obviously, Martin Luther King emphasized the importance of non-violence and talking to one another. That can take a longer time than radical change, where you promote civil unrest, you know, destroy buildings and things like that. But I think ultimately good things take time, and certainly conversation, and they should be done in a democratic way. And so that he promoted that. He understood that that took time, but it was certainly a solution that worked. Another thing with liberalism in general is that there is a room for reason and a scientific epistemology, which means that there is an objective truth that we can all come to through assessing facts, through assessing data or information. Whereas the type of politics that we see today that relies heavily on postmodernism believes that there is no such thing as truth, and that everyone can have their own version of the truth. And so it argues without truth, there are no lies. So nobody can lie, which is hugely problematic if you're trying to find out, you know, commonalities between people and what we believe about the world. The other reason why I think Martin Luther King's vision was really powerful was because he emphasized the importance of personal responsibility. So as much as he spoke about white people, the privilege that they enjoyed at that particular time, he also spoke about what the problems within Black communities themselves and what they could do to remedy that. He said that there was a limit to what the white man could do. And again, he emphasized the importance of free speech and conversation, because if you don't have violence, you have conversation, and that is our route out of violence, through talking to one another. I think there is a point where extreme left identity politics and extreme right identity politics differs. There is a place, and I think I think it is their sophistication, their level of sophistication. So if you could sum up what the extreme right says, they say, well, white is best and everyone is below us. And that's so easy to understand for most people. And that's partly the reason why it's so easy to deconstruct and completely reject. And so that's why you don't really see it being embedded into our institutions, our universities. I mean, I could go and live my life without ever coming across, you know, a white supremacist in that sense. But I think that extreme left identity politics is so nuanced and so sophisticated in a way that extreme right identity politics is not. So much so that it has made it really easy for institutions and universities and the media to adopt such political ideology. So I'm going to show you a few examples. So you've got Channel 4 Black to Front. Now, this is really interesting because what they're going to do here is they disrupt TV for normal TV for about 24 hours to showcase Black people, as you can see what they have here, Black talent on and off screen. I think this could be a potential breach of the Equalities Act, because in order to bring that into existence, you have to discriminate on the basis of someone's skin color to be able to produce something like that. And so it's so interesting how that has been adopted by the media. We'll move here. So you've got universities promoting and accepting racially segregated spaces. So you have safe spaces for people who consider themselves non-white. As you can see, Sheffield Student Union banned white students from attending an anti-racism meeting. And more recently in Edinburgh, there was a event where they promoted racially segregated spaces, and we'll have a look at that in a second. And it's so interesting how that's not being rejected so forthrightly by universities, but rather adopted. And I think that's partly because of how sophisticated extreme left identity politics is. I think part of its sophistication comes from the fact that these beliefs or ideologies were born in academia themselves. Again, you have institutions, you have organizations like the Free Black University, which actually has a lot of funding put towards it. And what they have is, it's like this vision of having this university where they will be promoting Black feminists, Black queer folk, Black thinkers, Black spiritualists. So basically selecting a curriculum based on the skin color of somebody. And it's really interesting because it seems to homogenize how a certain racial group thinks. It certainly seems to me that it's making the case that all Black people think alike. And that's certainly not the case. That has a lot of public support as well. And it's interesting, and it's really interesting to find out why this is the case. We've got an event, you know, a really, really interesting phenomenon here with a lecturer called Dr. Neil Thin, who is a social anthropology lecturer. And he was cancelled effectively from his university and put under disciplinary measures because, you know, this is actually taken a screenshot taken from the organization accusing him. So it's a student organization called Blackhead, saying that because he said civilization is for everyone, that demonstrates his racism. And then you have forums like Edifes, which are basically confessional grounds in universities where you can confess how oppressed you are or how discriminated you are in an anonymous capacity to accuse other people. So I find this really interesting because you can make parallels with this and religion. And so this is what Neil Thin has said about the occurrence. He says that I've been lecturing here for 34 years without ever previously coming under this kind of attack. It's not that I've suddenly adopted unpopular opinions or started expressing myself in more offensive ways. What has changed dramatically is the tendency for some students with certain kinds of political views to seek to impose them on everyone else and to try and censor anyone who questions them by claiming that they are vulnerable and easily triggered and need to be shielded from viewpoint diversity in safe spaces. So something really interesting is happening right now. And I spoke about this sophistication. Just look at the concept of white supremacy. this graphic was shared by a few student union leaders when the protests had happened in 2020. It's certainly not clear to me how they've come up with its methodology. It's certainly not clear to me what some of these things are. So for example, I really don't know what spiritual bypassing is, but somehow it seems to be adopted by universities. You know, saying things like we're all one big family is now seen as white supremacy. Anything can effectively be explained as white supremacy if you take this triangle into, if you actually take it into question. It certainly makes sense now why the UN called the UK race report an example of white supremacy, because it probably did something that this triangle has explained. You know, anything can be explained away as white supremacy, which is incredibly unhelpful, especially if you're looking at ideas and trying to tackle ideas. That involves a certain amount of critical thinking, and that involves looking at ideas and being skeptical of them to some extent. But that skepticism or that questioning or critical thinking is seen as white supremacy, which is hugely, it impedes conversation. Again, I don't know where this methodology has come from. I don't know how, I don't think there was any rigorous intellectual standards put onto that, but it was just something constructed out of thin air. So the kind of, the overarching philosophy that all of this comes under is critical race theory. And there's so many things that it argues, and I probably don't have time to go through all of them, but things like empathetic fallacy. So it's not enough for people to be empathetic or understanding. You literally, so one of the scholars, Robin D'Angelo, talks about how it's no longer enough to be good intended, well intended. You have to functionally rewire yourselves as white people to quote unquote understand the experiences of people of ethnic minority descent. Things like interest convergence theory, where even where you have cases where ethnic minorities or underrepresented groups are doing really well, that's because the white man wants them to. So you've got interest convergence theory. It's a way to explain itself away. Again, I spoke about the whole guilty until proven innocent. I also want to talk about this one simplistic element of critical race theory, and it's oppressed v suppressor optics. I think it's really nuanced and really sophisticated, like looking at the white supremacy triangle. But here I think it's really, really simplistic. You're either an oppressor or an oppressed person, and that you have no control over. That is determined by your immutable identitarian traits, so your gender, your sexuality, your ethnicity. So if you look at someone like me, I would be seen as someone oppressed, and I reject the idea that I am. I think it's a huge slap in the face to tell, I grew up in a very welcoming and open society. I was afforded a lot of opportunities. People were very kind. And I've also lived in other countries where I've not had that experience. So it'd be a slap in the face to say that I'm oppressed. And also, it removes any kind of agency that people have. So you become obsessed with how powerless you are, and you forget how much agency you truly have. So this was the reading list provided to me by my university, and it's actually provided to staff. As you can see, it was on StaffNet Manchester. And it was during the protests and when the whole race conversation became really important. And they basically got people to read these texts that come from critical race theory, and they paid for that, they subsidized that. And so these texts were provided for free. I don't have a problem with them doing that. I think that these are, at the end of the day, they are ideas and they should be spoken about and engaged with and critiqued like any other idea. But I do have a problem with the fact that my university was very, very selective in the texts that they decided to present. So there was no Booker T. Washington, there was no Martin Luther King, there was no Thomas Sowell. There was very limited ideology being put forward. And so part of the question is, how do we come to grips with this type of this ideology. And as far as I'm concerned, people like myself, we're not making too many arguments, we're not asserting too many things. All we're saying is that I think people should work, should see each other on the basis of our common humanity, where identity shouldn't really matter, or your identitarian grouping shouldn't really matter. And I think that this has been well demonstrated in history. And so really it becomes a case of looking at what the other side is saying. So where you have people talking about white privilege, what are they actually saying? What is the actual argument? Where do they come from? So if you look at white privilege, it started in America in academia. I think it was in the 80s. And you had an academic, Peggy McIntosh, who wrote a list of ways in which she felt privileged in life. So again, when you need to look at her methodology, she didn't control for where she lived. She didn't control for her, who she interacted with. She just wrote a list of the things that she felt in which she felt she was privileged. So things that included finding band-aids or plasters in her skin color, or being able to shop without being followed, feeling normal in society, whatever that means, being able to talk with her mouth full. That she literally wrote that in her list, and that wasn't checked for methodology. It wasn't put up to any kind of scrutiny. And it's so interesting how this kind of these conceptualizations of white privilege have been readily adopted by institutions, by the media, without really being critiqued, and also in government policy as well. And I think it's really, really troubling. Again, what we see is an obsession with outcomes when it comes to critical race theory. They assert that every kind of example of inequality or disparity is an example of prejudice or discrimination. I like to study economics, and one thing that I've realized in economics you will be taught is Price's law. And what Price's law says is that 50% of the work done at a company is done by a small number of people. And specifically, it says Price's law is that 50% of the work is done by the square root of the number of employees that the company will have. So you'll have, for example, a company of 25 people. What you'll find is that 5 people will be bringing in half of the income. 5 people will be the hyper-productive individuals. And you could test this out with different things, Monopoly and checkers, for example. And you can find a list of strategies in Monopoly and checkers, and you will always find the square root of those strategies getting the best outcomes. So then the question is, are the rules of checkers or Monopoly racist? And what a critical race theorist will say is yes. One can look at music, for example. Top-selling artists worldwide from 1954 to 2016 is only a very select few. Again, one could critique that for being a case of capitalism. I don't think that's the case, because if you look at the number of, I don't know anything about football, but if you look at the number of football players who have scored 500 goals and above, that's always also the case. You can also recover Price's law. So it certainly doesn't take into account these types of things as well. And so when we talk about critical race theory and different types of identity politics, like identity politics on the right, you have to ask yourself, what is the end goal? So what the extreme right, sorry, that's meant to say extreme left here. What the extreme right says is that we want racial purity. But what the extreme left say is something, again, a lot more complicated and a lot more, I guess, nuanced. They say they want equity or equality. And it's like, equity with respect to what? Equality with respect to what? What they want is radical equality or radical equity, which is equality in every sphere or domain in life, which actually has its origins in Marxism, one can argue. So then it becomes the question of what narrative do we want to focus on? the Manhattan Institute did some really interesting research, and what they found was that those who favor a more cynical view of society actually don't look at how much progress we've done, and that's certainly the case with critical race theory. It's really pessimistic about the progress that we've achieved in society. So if you look at opinion polls, for example, more people are optimistic and happy about their relatives marrying a Black person, which is a huge achievement, because that's the most intimate relationship you can have with someone. So if we see less attrition with respect to that, it's a big progress. One thing about critical race theory is that I understand that life and humans are full of confirmation bias, but when they read passages of critical race theory, here's a study with a passage from Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a critical race scholar. They tried this with African Americans. When they read a passage, they felt more pessimistic about their life and their life opportunities. So to me, the question is, if we're going to have confirmation bias about anything, why don't we have that with a positive idea of society? One which says that people can live together in harmony and is not obsessed with identity. So yeah, I'm gonna open the floor to some questions. I'm gonna stop the screen share now. And back to here.
Thank you very much, Zara. So you've got a little bit more to go, I understand, on your slides. Yeah. We've got to say 10 minutes for questions now.
Yeah, 15
okay.
minutes.
Let's go to Simon Bowden. You put your blue hand up quite some time ago. I don't know if you've still got a question for us, Simon.
Yeah, can you hear me, David?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I'm here with the two elder stateswomen of our gathering. So I think it's important to kind of admit problems, and I think the problems in England and in Dorset aren't the same as in the United States. There are very few Black people, you know, in Dorset or Poole, and the traditional, slightly unpleasant way of hierarchies working and prejudice in our context it goes back to the English class system and stuff around that, 2 world wars, and you know, many hundred years of sort of fighting the French over this and that, and these things figure particularly with older people. So I've just finished reading Keats' letters with a sort of, one of the big themes in that comes from William Hazlitt's influence on Keats as a sort of young liberal, and he's looking for humanity to become more disinterested and people to be educated and aware enough to use their imaginations to empathize with people who are different. Even so, Keats in his letters shows signs of snobbery, of wanting, he's dismissed as one of the Cockney poets, but he tries to distance himself from the genuinely lower class. What I'd like to do briefly now is ask my mum to say what she thinks about Germans.
I don't want to talk about that.
Well, why do, because I mean, you told me the other day that you were really upset that one of your granddaughters had married a German. Why, Mum? Just say.
I don't like to be forcibly brought in.
Okay, that's all right,
okay,
Angela.
So I'm going to switch across to Anne, who comes from the Jewish experience. And do you have any general feelings about Palestinians or the Arabs and Palestinian people, you know, around Israel, or not?
Well, yes, I certainly have some feelings, but I was very shocked at what went on last night and how suddenly all this business in the El-Aqsa Mosque, all these men taking their food for the end of Ramadan into a mosque. It seemed to me very strange, and all on their prayer mats, and the very masculine dominated picture that one got. But I'm very ignorant because I don't understand the meaning of the word woke. What does woke mean?
And nor do I understand what woke is. Why can't they just speak
That's a great question.
Okay, so maybe this is the end of it from us. Yeah, but
Okay.
just to say that we all have our prejudices. Personally, I'm upset by where Brexit has got us into great electoral success for the right wing on the back of people waving Union Jacks. But yeah, so I mean, that's what we've got to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon, and Angela and Anne. So Zara, do you want to respond? I mean, maybe as well say something about the definition of the word woke. It's a very tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's certainly something that's popped up in discourse that's not really been solidified in academic literature. It's more of a sensation that's been going on, and the kind of core tenets of wokeism is this kind of idea that there is some sort of enlightenment that one achieves eventually in life, that they become woke or awoken to the realities, the harsh realities of life. And I don't mean that in a general sense. I mean that in a very specific way. And a lot of these ideas come from critical race theory. And it comes from the idea of intersectionality, that there are certain intersects that mean that certain groups of people are more oppressed than others. So if you look at, if you were a white female, you're less oppressed than someone who's black, lesbian, a female black lesbian. Certainly unclear how that works. But then it's this, what really defines wokeness is this tendency to hold on to it like a religion, these beliefs. So what you have now, especially on social media and on the internet, is that you have people calling each other out on certain things that they may have erred on, and people being cancelled for saying things that are reasonable and moderate, but now what the woke group have decided to be unreasonable. So saying things like civilization is for everyone, like Neil Finner said, that is something to call someone out on. And it's relentless in the way that it calls out people. And I think what really encapsulates this whole idea of wokeness is the fact that it's unforgiving. So you have a religion, but there's no concept of forgiveness. So you have, for example, instances where last year you had a lady in Central Park, I think, acting frantically with someone of African-American descent. And there were calls for her to lose her job and be isolated from friends and families, but there was certainly no conversation as to how she could get back into society and integrate. So it's about really picking out where heresy is and making people feel culpable for that, but there is no concept of forgiveness. So I think that's what wokeness is. And it's more so typical of the left than it is with the right.
Okay, thank you for that, Zara. Let's go to David Nunn. David, what's your question or comment?
Thank you, David. I wasn't quite expecting to get up first there, but thank you ever so much. I don't know whether mine's like a flow of consciousness, really, that rather than a question.
Keep it brief.
Well, okay. There was a couple of quotes that I've written down. White people have privilege. Well, the comment I've got is that's not all of them. Not all white people have got privilege. Aristocracy. Why just white people being biased? Well, the fact is, I think everybody's biased. It's a human trait. I'm not criticising, by the way. It's just me racial segregated spaces, isn't that just division? Isn't breaking down into groups and smaller groups, whether it be black or this, that, and the other, isn't that divisive? It puts people up against each other. It's not unified. I'm a trade union rep, and we try to be a union together. And the quote you mentioned, civilization is for everyone, being racist. I just think that's barking. I just do not understand what on earth is racist about that. Colorblindness I read down as well, also really at the top of the white supremacist. Why is color? I'd have thought colorblindness would have meant that actually it doesn't matter what color people are. Really, and you said identity shouldn't matter. Well, it clearly does, and it seems to be forever breaking down people into smaller and smaller groups and pitching them against each other, which I think is very divisive and dangerous. And one final thing, the cancel culture and woke, firstly, I just don't get it. I think, again, that is a very easy way to dismiss things that you don't agree with. And sorry, I'll sum up woke as being it's seemingly the right to get offended and insulted about absolutely anything and then cancelling it. And you think, well, humans should be up for challenge, reasonable challenge, obviously not getting rude and nasty. But anyway, so you might want to just explain to me how, and I know you didn't say this, but how is saying that civilization is for everyone racist in any way whatsoever? Because I just don't understand that.
So understanding why that could be perceived as racist is really getting into the minds of critical race theorists and postmodernists. So what postmodernism says is that there is no such thing as truth because everyone has their own kind of objective truth, because everyone has their own version of truth. And if there are a group of people that say that this is the truth, then that de facto is the truth. And you can't really do anything to contest that. It's a really messy kind of logical or illogical picture here. I totally share your opinions and your concerns, particularly with the concepts of, why is colorblindness being looked down on? Wasn't that something that we were all working towards? I think what's happening now is what people are responding to that is they're saying, well, if you say that you're colorblind, you're basically saying you don't see color. And it's like, well, until a few years ago, it seems as if we had the wits to know it was a metaphor. So obviously you see people's color, you see what people look like, people can see my hair color. But what that means is that it's a metaphor in saying that doesn't matter, that my hair color shouldn't be a reason for which you make value judgments on someone, or their skin color shouldn't be the reason why you make value or character-based judgments on that person. And so that is, I think, the reason why there are such grievances around such terms. I think they're being taken in a literal sense. So for example, we don't see people complaining about the term being warm-hearted. When you describe someone as warm-hearted, you're basically saying that they're kind. You're not literally saying that, their heart is hot or warm. You're basically describing a metaphor. And I think until a few years ago, we had the wits to know that this was a metaphor, and that's no longer the case.
So he's warm-hearted now cancelled as well then? I didn't know that.
Like it might be.
I hope not. Anyway, David, thank you ever so much. Thank you, Zara.
Thank you, David. Zara, I'm just conscious of time. We've got another, at least two more questions, or maybe three. John's waving his hand at me. And then I know you've got a few more slides to go, but we're just to keep an eye on the time. Let's go to Richard Nienaber.
Yeah, the second time's good. Thanks for your talk today, Zara. You briefly touched on outcomes, and it seems to me that identity politics is very much focused on past injustices and kind of bringing them into the present and trying to rectify them. So I was wondering, like, how do you speak to the notion that identity politics is trying to make past wrongs right? And what I'm talking specifically there about, like in the US, they talk about reparations and things like that. Thanks.
So with respect to reparations, I think that's certainly an interesting conversation. So if you look at people like Coleman Hughes, what they argue is that in the US, more focus needs to be put on the issues plaguing Black communities, which would be disillusionment at a very young age and education. So more effort should be spent there. But in terms of how we see, how we try and rectify historical injustices today, I think it's a really interesting conversation because, well, what I like to do is I like to look at the way that we talk about this stuff. So in the past, what we used to speak about was examples of, unequal opportunity. We could point to specific policies, specific mechanisms, specific law, legislation, which said that, for example, Black people or women or whoever didn't have a right to something. It could have been, a sign on a swimming pool saying no Black people allowed. And you could point to that and say, well, that was an example of discrimination. We've been really good at weeding those out and then rectifying them. And so now what the conversation has become, it's become more so a case of, I think it's become more like ghost chasing. So you've got notions like institutional racism, which actually it has no kind of homogeneity in the literature. So if you look at where the term was first used in Charles Hamilton's book called Black Power, institutional racism was seen as something more subtle. So you can't locate it in the policies, you can't locate it in the in specific laws and specific actions. So it's like where can you locate it? And so now when we talk about systemic racism, it's a case of talking about outcomes, and any example of an equal outcome or an example of disparity is an example of discrimination, which is a faulty conclusion because we know that that's not necessarily the case. Again, when we talk about racism now, it's more of a case of unconscious bias. You can't prove it. There's no proven method to prove unconscious bias. The implicit association test, for example, is hugely faulty. So faulty that you can't use it in a court of law. It has a very low test-retest reliability coefficient, meaning that when you take it, it doesn't give you the same results. And so you can't use that stuff. There's other reasons why it's faulty. So it's just like the way that the conversation is now being framed is that it's almost blaming people. It's almost saying like, unbeknownst to you as white people, you've got white privilege or you've got unconscious bias. And it's like, you can't work with that because it kind of functions as a Kafka trap logical fallacy where you can explain things away, where you assert things. And for example, Robin DiAngelo says that white people's discomfort around talking about race is an example of their racism. That's just like saying that your denial of you having been possessed by a demon is evidence of you being possessed by a demon. So it's a really interesting conversation that's going on, and I think it's quite unproductive now than it was in the past. And I think that we need to focus on tackling that.
Thanks, Zara. Let's see if we can squeeze one or two more in. John Mills. John, what was your question or comment?
I was going to ask a question about unconscious bias, which this lady's beautifully answered for me. Thank you very much. So you've had a few religious correlations between identity politics. Unconscious bias strikes me as original sin. It's the same concept. How do you prove it, one way or the other? Thank you very much. You answered my question.
Thank you, John. I've just got a question also from Barry Newman, Zara. It's something I mentioned earlier when we were talking this morning. Just if you could quickly say something about the funding of the Equiano project, whether you have sort of wealthy backers or whether it's just done on a shoestring, or basically what the finances of the project are.
Sure. I also spoke to Inaya about this question because I'm not the person who directly deals with the finances of the organization. So it's just two of us, and 95% of our income comes from donations. That is from the kindness and the generosity of our lovely donators. And we do hold events where we go to schools and we provide talks and things like that, that do provide a small percentage of our income, but it's mostly donations. We are looking forward to expand through applying to funding bids, but that's something that's not been done yet. So right now we are almost entirely fueled by donations. So if you do enjoy what we do, and if you have enjoyed my talk, we would appreciate your support, and that's not necessarily financial support. We would appreciate your support on our social media as well. So that's how we are funded.
Thanks, Zara. Okay, in view of time, we try to finish at 3:30, but I mean, I'm prepared to sort of run on if we need to. So do you want to go back to your concluding slides?
Can I share my screen? And so what are our better ideas? What solutions do we have? I think the solutions that we propose aren't new. These are things that have been argued by people like Martin Luther King, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass. So they're not new. But I think that the way in which we can implement these solutions can be quite novel, can be quite new. So if you look at conversation, for example, I think technology has made it such that we can have conversations in front of lots of different people to make people aware of the debates that we're having and the conversations that we're having. So that's one of the solutions that we have, is to promote free speech and to promote free and open inquiry and free and open discussion. And so our solutions, like I said, they are rooted in the liberal tradition, where we put the individual and a common humanity before we put any sort of group identity. So it is far more important to judge someone based on the content of their character than it is to judge them on any sort of identitarian traits. And also, I think there can be a danger with obsessing about identity too much. I think that can take away from the real conversations that could be had with respect to policy and economics. If we do really want to make any sort of change that impacts people, those are the conversations that we want to have. I recently read an article in the Financial Times by someone called Simon Cooper, and he said something that just really made sense to me. He said, well, everyone has an identity, and supporting or opposing a statue in some faraway city solidifies yours. No matter that, none of it makes the slightest difference to the well-being of the cleaning lady on the 5:30 a.m. bus. So basically, we could talk about identity until we're blue in the face, but if we're not talking about practical solutions and using evidence to guide us with that, what's the point? We're still going to have the lady waiting for the bus at 5:30 a.m. It makes no difference to her life. And so there comes a point where you need to move on. And when we do talk about these policies or these changes that can positively impact people, we need to be guided by a vision and also by a scientific epistemology and evidence. So our moral vision is where we emphasize common humanity and we put individuals first. So before categorizing people as, oh, you're a woman, oh, you're a Black person, you look at them and think you're a human first. And you get to know them and you talk to them and you realize how rich they are in their values, in their personality. And that's the most important thing about the person. And so we don't want to live in a society where we emphasize differences based on these arbitrary identitarian characteristics. The other thing is, I've got a picture of some water and some droplets. So I would describe our vision as the water and these little droplets that are carried in this suspension as evidence that can guide us. So for example, with unconscious bias, I think it's certainly an interesting theory. And there's conclusions that have been made in the science, but what we seem to have done is we've kind of abused that and misused those conclusions and use them in a way that feels a political ideology. And I think if we are going to use evidence, it should be used appropriately, where the appropriate conclusions are drawn and we're working with those rather than push something that isn't necessarily true. And so I think, you know, critical race theory talks about stories, but I think we are all, as human beings, we love stories. And so I think if we are going to talk about stories, we should talk about very positive ones. So for example, you know, I played some music at the beginning, and it was by someone called Daryl Davis. He's a pianist, and he's someone who's gained a lot of fame because he actually attends KKK rallies in America. And he does so in order to talk to them, just to talk to them. And inadvertently, he becomes their friend, and they give up their capes. And this takes a matter of years. So there was this one famous case of him befriending a leader of, I think, a KKK rally in Texas, of a guy, his name was Robert Kelly. And in the beginning, he was open to talking to Daryl Davis, but he wouldn't invite him over for a coffee at his house. It took him a matter of years, but he eventually gave up that cape. And now Robert Kelly talks about how divisive the KKK is. So we can learn something from Daryl Davis. And I think the most important thing that we can learn is that it's important to talk to one another, because a lot of times, a lot of people that hold certain beliefs true to themselves don't really know where they come from in the first place. And so when they see a different perspective, they might be able to change their mind. So I'm just going to show you a video of Daryl Davis really emphasizing this point. So pay particular attention at the end where he talks about the importance of conversation. So to conclude, if we think about politics in a very general and loose sense, you can argue that it's always been concerned with organizing itself based on collective interests, and those interests can form a group identity. And so that could be the definition in a very loose and general sense of identity politics. And I think it's a good, simple definition that can be applied to both the left and the right. And so it becomes a question of where you see identity politics, how does it manifest? What goals do they try and achieve? And what frameworks do they use? And that's where you have a dichotomy of certain identity politics emphasizing a common enemy, which I think is problematic and where social breakdown happens. And then you have others that emphasize a common humanity. So arguing that everybody is of equal inherent moral worth, and that everyone is here rather than some groups being here and some groups being there. And I think that this occurs on, you know, extreme forms of identity politics happen on both sides of the political spectrum. But I think that the left-wing extreme identity politics are so sophisticated and nuanced in a way that the extreme right-wing politics are not. And as such, they've been able to infiltrate institutions, universities, and schools. And our solutions include conversation and focusing on a common humanity, and eventually talking about real problems. But to do that, free speech and conversation is key. So thank you so much for listening to me talk about this subject, and I welcome the floor to open to ask me any questions and provide me with any feedback.
Thank you very much, Zara. Okay, well, we've still got a little bit of time. Let's go to Sarah Dennis. Sarah, what's your question?
Hi, Zara. Thank you so much. It's my school you're coming to on Monday.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and I joined because I saw you on Instagram. I'm following you on Instagram, so I saw that you were doing this. So I'm not from Dorset, everybody. I'm from South London. Simon, you said something about it being different in Dorset to in America, but it's also different here in London, where I felt last summer after George Floyd was killed, that suddenly I was being asked somehow to pick a side, and it was a sort of, it was just a feeling I had. And I've been told that I'm a white slave trader in Brixton. I've had a friend who was told she was a white privileged BITCH. And I had a difficult conversation with my immediate neighbour, who is Black, and I disagreed with her on some things about what was happening in America, and she became extremely angry. And I tried to placate her by showing her that video of Daryl Davis, and she absolutely lost it with me, telling me that, you know, if I thought that making friends with the enemy, i.e. the KKK, was any kind of solution, then, I mean, anyway, I didn't then tell her that he had de-radicalized 200 Nazis and white supremacists, because I thought I might blow her mind. But, you know, she's definitely somebody who, she'd advocated reading Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which I did, and it's poisonously divisive. I'm in a mixed race family. My children are half Black and half white. So, you know, you read a book like that and you think, so are my children half oppressed and half oppressor? It makes absolutely no sense at all. I've spoken to my son about this. I said, I don't know why I feel more worried about you going out late at night than I did about my daughter. And he said, you should be more worried about me because I'm Black, I'm more likely to be stabbed. So it's this whole subject is very, very interesting to me, and I really, really love to go and live in Dorset.
Come to Dorset.
I think I'm coming to Dorset.
It's lovely. I'm so glad you joined us today, Sarah.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Zara, I wonder if we can just go to another question, if that would be all right. Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. I just wanted to say, Sarah, I'm really excited to be coming over to your school and talking about our common humanity with your pupils. I'm really excited.
Yeah, brilliant. I can't wait.
Let's go to Gary. Gary Bootle. What's your question, Gary?
Thank you, Zara. That was an awesome talk, and I couldn't agree more with it if it was possible. So that's it was tremendous to hear. My question's a little bit divisive, sorry, but the Hartlepool results yesterday, were they down to an adoption of woke tactics?
So what you'll find is in constituencies where you'll have areas which were traditionally left-wing now adopting the Conservative Party, it's really interesting because you know, you go back to the conversation of the left behind, and you know, Francis Fukuyama talks about this in quite some detail. He also talks about this in an international level, but also on a national level. So there are many reasons as to why this happens. And what's happened is that particular groups of people, particularly white men, who have become really, in their perspective, left behind because of deindustrialization and the technological revolution. They've been pushed out of work. So previously they would have had work in manufacturing industries, work which was heavily dominated by men. And now we see this change in society towards more service or tertiary industries, where you have things like the hospitality industry really booming, universities, schooling, those sorts of industries really taking place. And they usually favor more women. And so you get this group of people who are left behind that no longer see the appeal in, you know, the traditional kind of labor politics. And I think that what the Conservative Party has done really well is appeal to that group of people. And I think that Labour would have done very well if it focused on more universal policies, economic policies. So focusing on geographical inequality, where it doesn't do so much insofar as identity politics goes. So rather than framing their solutions to problems vis-a-vis specific racial groups or identitarian groups. So rather than saying that this, we're putting into place this policy so that it tackles, you know, Black people not being able to get into school, they should have framed their policies in a way that it applies to everybody. So what we see is a universal kind of policy. So a good example of this abroad would be Obamacare. And that was a good example of, in my opinion, of a universal policy where a lot of people got access to healthcare irrespective of their previous medical conditions, their race, gender, sexuality, and so on and so forth. And I think that what Labour is doing is playing a dangerous game of identity politics, and this is the result of it.
Thanks, Zara, and thanks, Gary.
Just a question, thank you, or answer, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure we could have a huge debate about that aspect of it. But let's go to Roger. Roger, what's your comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. I've actually put a note on the chat because I think I agree with nearly everything that you say, Zara, but I only think so because terms like universalism, identity politics, woke, Kafka trap logical fallacy, identitarianism, critical race theory, white fragility, scientific epistemology, they puzzle me, and I have to think hard and look these things up before I can make a sensible comment. So I think that the message would be more easily transmitted to other people like me if you looked at the language. I think it needs simplifying a bit.
No, thank you so much for pointing that out. I really appreciate your feedback. I could definitely do that for next time, I think. Thank you for pointing that out, that I could definitely, you know, simplify these terms so that they're more accessible to a wide range of people. So thank you for the commentary.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's so much jargon in this field and it is difficult, but yeah. Let's go to Marjorie. Marjorie, what's your comment? You just need to unmute yourself, Marjorie. Marjorie, we've lost your...
Oh, yes, maybe.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, my comment is that, well, as we're humanists, how much do you think religious schools are a problem? Because by definition, if you're setting yourself up as teaching your students to be good little whatever religion you wish to choose them to be, aren't they by definition then being opposing any other religion or any other religion that you might approve of? I mean, how much do we need to bring conversation in schools? And ideally, in my point of view, get rid of any religious schooling and have purely secular schooling, as the French do. Right, that's my... Okay. Yeah, so how much problem do you think we have with religious schools?
I think I don't have a particularly strong opinion with respect to religious schools, but what I do have a strong opinion with is having a sense of civic national identity. So whether or not religious schools exist, I think that more effort should be placed on emphasizing a common British identity and values. So rather than the conversation that we're having about identity right now, I think it would be more valuable to have conversations around what it means to be a British citizen. So for example, right now what you have in Hungary is you have a Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who says that Hungarian identity is based around Hungarian ethnicity, which is incredibly divisive. It cuts off a lot of people. And so those are the kinds of things that you want to avoid. And so you need to talk about what is it that creates a sense of Britishness? In America, that would be having a kind of shared identity around the Constitution. What is that for Britain? I certainly don't have the answer to that, and certainly that is something that needs to be explored. And with respect to religious schools, I think more can be done in terms of outside schooling itself to promote civic identity. Interfaith collaboration, so whether that be charity or community efforts that focus on bringing together different faiths, and focusing on a common humanity, I think that would be a good idea. I think that getting young people to engage in understanding citizenship and in partaking as active citizens in their community. So we see that to be the case a lot in America. We have institutions, universities, you know, when you apply to university in America, you talk about how much work you've done for the community and for your area. Over here, it's purely academic. When you apply for your UCAS application, you just write down your grades and the things that you think and the things that you've learned. Small paragraph, yes, that might be dedicated to, you know, extracurricular activities, but there's a greater emphasis of that in America that I think we can certainly learn from. And so I don't necessarily have a particularly strong opinion about religious schools, but I think that whether or not they exist, we could do more to bring different people together through a civic national identity.
Yeah, sorry, it's just me that I feel that if you're setting up this opposition from the age of 5 almost, by the time you're 18 and at university, there's a lot of ground that's been covered already, and we should be sort of talking about this from the very young age, not waiting till university and arguing about who's allowed to go to which or who's allowed to come to talk to certain groups. You know, I'm looking at getting this sort of conversation, this bigger conversation going from very young children, because that will surely stem a lot of problems later on.
Marjorie, we're just going to move on, but
yeah, fair enough.
You've made some great points. I just want to get 2 more questions in, and then we need to wrap up because we're a little bit over time. I'm going to come to Daniel next, and then David Nunn finally, and then we're going to have to wrap up. So, Daniel, what's your comment or question?
Thank you. I don't want to disagree, but I do happen to agree with the concept of Black Lives Matter. I don't agree with rioting and setting fire to things, and I think that Twitter cancelling mobs are often bad on the basis that they don't have any requirement of looking at evidence before deciding who to cancel. But I think that Black Lives Matter, just as a statement, is one that I agree with. I do think that the lives of people who are Black do matter. I think that when people say all lives matter, they often mean it to negate Black Lives Matter. You know, we shouldn't be talking about Black people. Let's talk about everyone instead. But everyone already knows that all lives matter. And if we don't have things like Black Lives Matter in support of Black people specifically, why not go a step further and get rid of things like gay pride parades? You know, we do live in a society where gay people have pretty much the same legal rights as non-gay people or LGBT people generally, so we could get rid of it, but I think it's nice that we have the parades, not just because I like parades because they're fun, but also because it's a good example to other countries. And it's something I think we need to continue doing in order to continue having these rights and to not slip back into a system where we don't have those rights.
I absolutely agree, and I don't think anybody disagrees with the statement Black Lives Matter. The statement itself is a very laudable claim that everybody, I think, agrees with, and everyone holds dear to their heart. I think what Black Lives Matter, the political group, they've recently signed up as a political organization. What they've done is something very, very interesting. So they've taken a phrase that essentially nobody can disagree with and then used that as the name. So when you think about Black Lives Matter, the political organization, that's what you think it is about. That's not the case. If you look at its initial, you know, I guess you could call it a manifesto, they had things like bringing down the nuclear family, you know, anti-capitalism, which I don't see how that intimately relates to Black people. And so what they've done is they've taken a very specific part of their overarching ideology and stuck it as the face. And so if there is anybody that tries to disagree with the political group and what they're trying to say, which has its origins in critical race theory, And if you're trying to get to grips with that and critique that, it's synonymously taken as a critique of the statement Black Lives Matter, and that's not necessarily the case. Nobody disagrees that nobody agrees with the fact that Black lives don't matter. They do matter, but then, you know, having it as your nomenclature means that it's incredibly difficult to talk about its underlying philosophies. And so I would agree, but that's where I think the problem lies. And that's why you have reactionary statements like all lives matter or white lives matter, and then it becomes incredibly divisive because these conceptualizations of identity, Black and white identity, they're set off against each other in that sense. And that becomes really divisive. So I think I would agree with you, but I think we need to look at what's going on with respect to the political group and what they are arguing for, and the statement itself.
Thank you, Zara, and thank you, Dan. Right, final question is from David Nunn, and then we'll just wrap up. David, what's your
Thank you ever so much, David. And I think it's very, very apt actually to follow the previous question, because my question was sort of related to that, in that, I mean, let's be honest, the political movement that is BLM is a Marxist, far left, anti-capitalist organisation that they believe have been infiltrated by all sorts that are just want to cause trouble. However, I do take what's been said, that actually the term Black Lives Matter, I personally don't have an issue with that, and I think it's quite a powerful statement. However, it's an identity. It's identifying one particular part of society and say they matter. So from what Zara's been saying, and you said earlier on that identity shouldn't matter, my simple question is BLM a problem for that? Does BLM help that particular motivation of your project or hinder it?
I think that in the way that the problem with BLM is that it's a decentralized movement. And so you have different factions of BLM. There is a common kind of group of people that have set out a specific like ideology, but then you have different factions of it that, you know, on the one hand are going about rioting and creating real civil unrest, and then you have other factions which are protesting normally and peacefully. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. I think people have the right to protest. And I think in the case where they are peacefully protesting, we need to listen to what they say and then deal with their arguments. So I think it's brought about some very interesting conversations in terms of the role of the police, and certainly with respect to looking at different, so one of the things that they do is they list examples of inequalities or disparities. And so they say that, well, this is an example of systemic racism happening. So it's brought forward that conversation, which I think is a very productive conversation to have, and then to break down, well, is this a matter of prejudice, or is this a matter of, okay, there are other things that can explain this disparity? In terms of, you know, cases where, you know, the BLM protests have turned into riots, I don't think that's been very helpful at all. And it's something that we at the Equiano Project don't advocate for. You know, I think what we do believe in is looking at where people disagree and finding common ground. And, you know, there are people who advocate for the BLM kind of philosophy, and we need to talk to them. And so conversation is key. So in terms of whether or not that's a hindrance, I think it's only a hindrance if you think about it in that way. I think we can look at it and think that, you know, we disagree, but there is opportunity for conversation as well. And so I'm really keen to having those conversations with those people who do believe in that way and find out why they do. So I hope that answers your question.
No, I should. Thank you very much. And I should have said, thank you very much for the talk. Very, very interesting, very stimulating. Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening.
Okay, Zara, well, thank you so much for your time today, and a very good presentation, and for answering all of our questions. I think this has opened up a conversation for us that, you know, no doubt we will continue many more times than today. What I've really loved about your presentation is the fact that this phrase, common humanity, has come through loud and strong above everything else, and that's such a strong humanist message, which is really great. So we wish you all the best, and we hope that your visit to the North London School with Sarah on Monday goes really well.
Thank you.
And yeah, as you say, let's have the dialogue. Let's have dialogue with people that disagree, and just keep the conversation going. So thank you thank you everyone for attending today. I'll put a report in the bulletin, and I'll explain some of those terms as well that get a little bit technical. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much, Zara.
Thank you so much for the feedback. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.